Alrighty guys, Alright, hope you enjoyed that intro. My name is Brett Garamelas, Drone Pilot Pro, and in that introduction I tried to mix it up so you could see both the DJI FPV drone, traditional FPV drone, and then a normal DJI drone. And you can see the different footage. Now obviously you could fly an FPV drone sort of like a normal drone, and a normal drone sort of like an FPV drone. So there's a million ways you can fly, but I thought that would be a cool introduction for today's video. I'm gonna give you 3 reasons to buy the DJI FPV drone that's gonna come out on March 2nd, and 3 reasons not to buy it, okay? Now I'm gonna give you a lot more than 3 reasons, but 3 major reasons and then some little reasons also to both buy it and not buy it. So there's been so many leaks online, and I've checked with a few legitimate sources, and yes, the DJI FPV drone is finally gonna come out on March 2nd. So March 2nd, you'll be able to buy that, and I'll put a link below this video. So if you wanna buy that, you can check that out. So in this video, I'm not gonna spend a ton of time going over the specs. I'm gonna go over them briefly, and then we're gonna get into the 3 reasons why you should buy it and 3 reasons why you should not buy it, okay? So let's go over these specs. I'm sure a lot of you know it already, but let's just run down. Now, we don't know all the specs, and yes, I'm getting these specs from many different sources, so it's hard for me to cite just one source, but several of these sources have flown the actual drone. So I'm just gonna give you the specs that we know right now, but there's still some things we'll find out on March 2nd. So I'm gonna briefly go over the specs that we know. So DJI FPV is gonna shoot 4K at 60 frames per second and 1080p at 120 frames per second. So we're gonna get great slow motion. So that slow motion is obviously needed because we're gonna be flying so fast. So DJI has implemented the same AI rock-steady stabilization from the Osmo Action, which is great digital stabilization. Obviously we prefer mechanical, but digital stabilization on Osmo Action look great. It'll fly like a normal GPS drone up to about 35 miles per hour. And then if you switch it to sport mode, it can fly faster than every DJI drone on the market right now, except for the Inspire 2. So it's gonna be able to fly up to 60 miles per hour in sport mode. All right, so then if you wanna go into full manual mode, this is for FPV pilots. If you have no experience flying FPV drones, I wouldn't do this before practicing on a simulator or getting some experience. But in full manual mode, it flies up to 90 miles per hour. And DJI has a little tutorial in the goggles, because you have the FPV goggles. So it's gonna give you a little tutorial on how to use manual mode. But with that said, we'll have to see exactly how that tutorial is. I've heard about it, but I haven't tried it out, so we'll have to see. Then the DJI FPV also has the return to home feature, so you'll always know where you took off and where you are and where the drone is. So if you want to return to home, that's a great feature. And then if the battery gets low, the drone returns to home automatically. It's got obstacle avoiding sensors in the front and downward. I'm not sure if that's just in normal mode or also in sport mode. I imagine it's not in manual FPV mode, but we'll have to see. But it does have obstacle avoidance sensors in the front and the bottom. So the field of view, the lens, it's a little wider than a normal GoPro lens. So it's gonna give you a wide field of view, which is nice to have. Now another nice feature is that it's gonna shoot H.264 and H.265. So I always tend to shoot H.265, so my footage looks better, but if you have a slower computer, you may wanna just shoot H.264, and that's perfectly fine. Now a really great feature is this emergency button. I don't know the name of what they call it, but I'm just calling it emergency button. So when you press the emergency button, the drone just stops and it just hovers in place. So I guess if you go into manual mode and you're flying FPV and you have a heart attack, you're like, oh, I didn't mean to press that. I don't know how to fly an FPV drone. Let me stop it. I'm gonna hit the wall. You just press the emergency button and the drone will just stop and hover in the air. And then if you're an experienced FPV pilot or you really get into the FPV mode, you're gonna be able to buy a separate controller and kind of like a joystick, just move it in different directions to move the drone in those directions. So you like tilt it to the left and down, and then the drone will go left and down. So that'll be really cool if you get into the manual mode, the FPV mode for this drone. And lastly, with the specs, it's gonna fly up to 20 minutes. I imagine more like 15 minutes or so, maybe 15, 18 minutes. It says up to 20 minutes, but depends on how you're flying. Obviously, if you're pushing in FPV mode, you're gonna get less flight time, but still, that's a tremendous amount of flight time for an FPV drone, because most FPV drones get about 2 to 7 minutes. Now, some obviously get a lot longer, and I know you can customize it to fly for a really, really long time. All right, but I'm just talking in generalities for this video. All right, the first reason to buy this DJI FPV drone is because it's easy to use right out of the box. You don't really buy a normal FPV drone, okay? Usually you build it. Now there are FPV drones you can just buy right out of the box and fly, but from most FPV pilots that I know, they prefer to actually build their own FPV drones and fly them and customize them. And then usually when you fly, you end up crashing it and having some spare parts and some extra drones ready so that you can fly them, and then you have to repair it. So you have to know a lot of things about soldering, putting it together, how to repair it, and all this can take a lot of time. And then just to be able to be a good FPV pilot, it does take some time to get good at that. Usually people just stay at home and they practice on their computer, flying with a simulator and just getting good at the different moves. Okay, so with this DJI FPV drone, you won't have to worry about doing all that. It flies like a normal GPS drone, so you can just do that right out of the bat and make use of it. Then it has the option, if you practice with a flight simulator or you get good at flying FPV drones, then you can use the FPV mode. However, you don't necessarily have to do that. So for ease of use, the DJI FPV drone will be a lot easier. And I don't really consider it a FPV drone. I consider it more like a hybrid drone. So I put it cross between, here's a normal drone, here's an FPV drone, and in between is DJI FPV. It's kind of like the best of both worlds, but not exactly a true FPV drone. So if you're an experienced FPV pilot, probably this drone isn't for you, because you want to build and customize and repair your own drone, and you won't be able to repair it. So if you're just starting out and want to get going real fast, this is a good introduction to FPV drones without like pushing you head first in, so to speak. All right, the second reason to buy this DJI FPV drone is for DJI's safety features. Now there's a lot of great features on this drone that are implemented from a normal DJI drone. So it has the return to home point. You can see where that is. The drone will return to home when the battery's low. You'll also be able to see the drone and where you are. So if you get really far, you know the battery's low, you need to bring it back. Okay, that's really nice. And because it flies like a normal GPS drone and FPV drone, you could go in normal GPS mode and the drone will just hover. It also has that emergency button that you can press if you're flying in FPV mode and you freak out, you're like, oh no, I can't do this. Then the drone will just hover, which is really nice, in place and go back to, GPS mode. And the other thing is you're flying really far. So if you go really far out when flying an FPV drone, a digital FPV drone, you can freak out, because if you lose signal, sometimes that can be disastrous. You might not see that drone again, all right? Whereas, I'm not talking about analog here, I'm talking about digital. So with DJI's drone, at least you have that return to home feature, and you don't have to worry about flying really far. The signal strength is going to be really good. And yeah, it'll give you a little bit more of a peace of mind when flying long distances. Now, like I said before, there are FPV drones that you can fly really far and you don't have to worry about that. But again, I'm talking in generalities. I'm not talking about specific drones. You can customize the FPV drone to make it much better than this DJI FPV drone. But again, customization depends on how much time and effort you want to put into all those things. settings. And for most people, that's not practical. So for the safety features built in right out of the box, this is really good to have. All right, the next reason to buy the DJI FPV drone, I mentioned this before, is the longer flight time. Okay, with most FPV drones, you're only gonna fly 2 to 7 minutes. I'd say like 3 to 5 minutes is kind of normal. With DJI FPV drone, you'll be able to fly 15 to 18 minutes, maybe even up to 20 minutes. So this is really great and allows for really long flight time. Now, I hear you in the comments, some people out there saying, wait a minute, I have an FPV drone that flies for, 45 minutes or something really long like this. Yes, you can make an FPV drone fly for a really long time, but again, I'm talking for the majority of people out there flying FPV. Usually it's a short period of flight time, and for this DJI FPV drone, 15 to 20 minutes is great time for an FPV drone, especially right out of the box. Alrighty, so now that we have the reasons why you should buy the DJI FPV drone, let's go into the reasons why you should not buy it. So the first reason is because you'll probably have to fly this drone in remote areas, and you won't be able to fly this as much in cities around people. Now, if there aren't people around, sure, you can do that. But with the new drone rules, flying over people, flying over vehicles, this drone, because it flies so fast, can have a dramatic impact if it hits someone. So the new rules state that you can't do this. So I'm not gonna get into all the rules about that. That's not for this video. But in summary, this drone weighs enough and flies fast enough that it could be risked to some people as deemed by the FAA. Therefore, you're really restricted to fly it more in areas where there aren't people. And because it weighs over 250 grams or 0.55 pounds, you'll have to register it with the FAA, and you'll have to follow remote ID when that goes into effect in 2023. So that's looking down the road. But if this is an investment you want to have for a while and use this drone, then that's something you have to think about. The second reason not to buy DJI FPV drone is because it's going to cost between $1,300 to $1,500. So it's going to be over $1,000, which is kind of pricey considering you could get a Mavic Air 2 right now or a Skydio 2, and that drone will fly really great and you'll have a lot less crashes and give you great cinematic footage. And you can even use the Mavic Air 2 and the Skydio 2 and speed up the footage in post to make it kind of look like an FPV drone. Now, granted, I understand there's so many things you could do with an FPV drone and the way you fly that you can't really do with a normal drone. But I'm saying if you wanted to, you could get a lot of the cool fast action and fast movement of an FPV drone. You could simulate that in post-production with the right editing techniques. And the thing is, a Mavic Air 2 or a Skydio 2 are for beginners. They can, right out of the box, they can fly it. Whereas an FPV drone takes a lot of time to learn. So if you really want to maximize the FPV features of this new DJI FPV drone, then you're gonna probably want to fly in a flight simulator and get really good at that, or at least feel really confident before you fly your real drone, because if you crash it, then it's crashed and you have to send it back to DJI. You can't really repair it yourself. So that's gonna be a bummer. You're gonna have to wait all that time. So it might make more sense just to get a Mavic Air 2 or a Skydio 2, and the chances of you crashing are a lot less. Now, normal FPV drones can take a beating. You can fly it, crash it, and usually they won't, you might damage the propeller here or there, or, the camera might come loose and you just have to secure it and stuff like that, but it's not gonna ruin the whole drone. Like, you can just make that repair right onto the site, just fix it, and then just take off again. Or, you have a spare part or a spare drone, you can just put the camera on that new drone and then just take off. Whereas with the DJI FPV, if you crash, you're pretty much at the will of DJI. You have to send it back to the manufacturer. You're not gonna have the spare parts, and it's gonna be so complicated, and it's gonna have proprietary DJI parts. You're not gonna have those parts on hand to repair it. So you have to rely on DJI to repair it and then send it back. So that's gonna be kind of a pain and ruin your whole creative flow. And lastly, with this DJI FPV drone, you're only gonna be able to use the camera that DJI has, whereas people who build their own normal FPV pilots, they use their own cameras, or they buy a separate camera like a GoPro, a 360 camera, or you could even build a whole big rig and hook up a cinema camera to it. So you have so many more options. Pretty much sky's the limit with the FPV drone, whereas this DJI FPV drone, you're really stuck to whatever DJI gives us. Now, this camera's gonna be good good, shoots 4K up to 60 frames per second, but it's still not that big of a sensor. It's not a 1-inch sensor. So a lot of people may be kind of upset about that. They're like, wait a minute, it's the camera's good, but it's not like great, you know. I might as well just use my GoPro, or I could use my 360 camera, or I could use my cinema camera. So again, customization, you're relying on DJI. It's kind of a double-edged sword. Some people like that, but true FPV pilots and people who like building and creating and having that control won't like this drone. And the last reason not to buy the DJI FPV drone is that you can't fly it alone and you can't fly it in a big group. So you can't go out there and just fly it alone because you're wearing the goggles and you have to be able to have a visual line of sight. So to meet the FAA standards for that, I don't know how this counts, but the FAA does consider it acceptable if someone else is watching your drone. So it's called a visual observer. So as long as you have one other person watching the drone while you're flying with the goggles, they consider that okay. All right, technically you really should be able to see your drone at all times, but with FPV drones, they do allow this. So if you're wearing the goggles, you won't be able to see the drone. So you always have to have someone to fly. And like for me, in my situation right now, I live alone, kind of in a remote area. So I don't really have friends that I fly with around here. And what am I gonna do? Like, I plan on getting this drone, but then I'm gonna have to try to find someone else to fly with or someone to watch my drone, okay? So that can be kind of annoying. And with the traditional FPV drone, you can build it yourself. It'll be a lot cheaper. And you can get a whole community of other FPV pilots who can tune into your feed and they'll be able to see what you're seeing. So it has that whole bonding and community aspect. Whereas DJI FPV, this isn't yet a niche. Now it could be a whole bunch of people obviously gonna buy this drone, so you could get together with other DJI FPV pilots, but they have to have the DJI FPV drone for them to tune into your feed and see what you're seeing and sort of communicate in that manner and have that bonding experience. But for traditional FPV pilots, being able to have control over the drones you build and already having that community, being able to get together and watch and see how each other are flying in real time is a great feature. And that could develop with DJI FPV. We'll have to wait and see. All right, so I hope you enjoyed that video, gave you some reasons to think about whether you're gonna get this drone or not. Personally, I am gonna get this FPV drone, hey, because I got the channel. I sort of have no choice, but I am looking forward to it. And my thought is, if you learn those FPV skills, you can combine that with your normal shooting skills to be more creative and have a whole new skill set to present to clients. So if you think you want to make money with your drone, this could be an interesting way and a new skill set to have to make money with your drone. And it can just be fun. If you want to bond with other people, like I said, you need to have someone else with you. And then you can reach out to other people and it might have that nice bonding experience. We'll have to see about that. In my next video, I'm going to give a more in-depth look at the DJI FPV drone after flying it for a while, comparing that with a traditional FPV drone, and then comparing that with a normal DJI drone. So I'm gonna compare all of those in much greater detail. So if that's something you wanna see, consider subscribing to this channel. I come out with drone reviews, tutorials, and tips to help you become a better drone pilot to fly like a pro. And before I leave this video, just wanted to let you know I have a free drone gear guide that I continually update. So I'll have to add the DJI FPV drone to that. By the time you're watching, it'll probably be in there, and you can get that guide by clicking right up there or in the link below. Thanks for watching, guys. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, or share it with a friend. I'm Breck Aramella, the Drone Pilot Pro, and remember, fly like a pro.